Now, Labor's demonising of the gas and oil sectors is under the microscope, with opposition leader Peter Dutton vowing today to reverse Anthony Albanese's intervention in the sector. He says the Albanese government is the most interventionist government in our nation's history, and Labor sees businesses and industry as instruments of the state. Dutton has also urged resources companies to fight alongside the coalition against energy policies driven by Labor's renewable zealotry. Strong words indeed. Joining me now is former Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce. Barnaby, I'm sure you agree with Peter Dutton, but why didn't we hear that type of talk during the election campaign from Scott Morrison, from Peter Dutton, from the entire team?
I don't know, but it's very important that when you're trying to make sure that we have an economy that works, that you don't put your foot on the throat of the people who provided you with the surplus. And gas, coal exports, we have this sort of dichotomy in the Labor Party where they believe coal and gas is evil, but they're happy to laud themselves at the dispatch box saying we've got a surplus. You wouldn't have had a surplus without coal exports. You won't have a surplus without gas exports. You probably won't have a surplus without agricultural exports. But you can't be running around with environmental biodiversity offsets, this caveat, that caveat, another caveat, and expect our economy to work like it did. So I support Peter 100%. And yeah, maybe we should have had an epiphany earlier.
Now, we spoke last week when I was in Canberra about the race-based referendum. One Nation leader, Pauline Hanson, has today said she wants to be the one to write the no case for the official voice pamphlet that will be sent to all households. That's going to cause a bit of a fight, I would imagine, between One Nation and the coalition over the official wording of the no side. Firstly, who do you think should write it? And how do you get a message across that really drives home why people should vote no in the referendum?
Well, I think the first reason you vote no is you don't differentiate rights on the colour of someone's skin or on their race. I think it's obnoxious that you differentiate rights on religion, on race, on creed, on colour. And that should be the principle that really matters, and everything else should follow on from there. And that's not just my view, that's the United Nations view. In fact, it's Article 1 of the United Nations Convention on Human Rights, that people are born with equal rights and equal dignity, and we're about to insert in the Constitution that people are born of different rights. And that's an anathema. The second thing, of course, is this will have a confounding effect on the operation of government. And it doesn't really look. The Australian Rugby Union are very good at playing, or sometimes all right at playing rugby union, not always. But they're okay at playing rugby union, and NRL, and God bless them all. But they're sports people. This is not a question about how they're going to set a scrum or whether the inside runs off the 5'8". This is a question about how a nation works and how you judge people. And I judge them as equivalents. Pauline Hanson's entitled to her views. The people who get to determine the no pamphlet are those who will vote no in the coming week, as described in the Australian, in the piece of legislation that's coming forward. And, Pauline's got her position, others have got theirs, and they're different, but they're to the same cause, like Jacinta Namatjira-Price, Warren Mundine, myself, Keith Pitt, David Littleproud, you name so many of them. What we believe is that we've got to have equivalence. We believe, as Pat Conahan said, when Faith Bandler said she didn't want a sort of differentiation on the colour of your skin, and as a premise to the 1967 referendum, one of the sort of the doyens of Aboriginal Australia in its sort of iconography. Well, I still believe in what Faith Bandler said. There shouldn't be a differentiation. Now, why we're bringing one about, God only knows.
Now, we are seeing the polls turn when it comes to the race-based referendum. It looked like it was going to fly through easily, and now a number of polls showed that the voice vote is reversing, and we've only really had any sort of opposition to the yes side in recent weeks. It took quite a while for the Liberal Party to come along and form their position. If you were to pick it now, how do you see this referendum result? How many states do you think, if any, will pass it, and what sort of percentage if you had to call it tonight?
Well, I said right at the very start, even when the polls were massively in favour of the yes, I said this referendum will go down because it's overreach. It's massive overreach. And people are sort of tuning in. They're paying more attention. They're saying, well, we're going to vote for a racial clause so that what's the next race we're going to sort of differentiate on? I mean, are Asians below or above Caucasians? Are Indians? Where do they fit in? You know, this sort of hierarchy of race, it's kind of absurd and it's obscene in some instances. And they're not elected, they're selected. So they just, a selected body that has sort of like an Australian House of Lords, it sort of sits there on a hereditary mechanism. It's just not going to work. It's not going to fly with the Australian people. And it doesn't really matter what any sporting team wants. They should concentrate on sport and stay out of politics. But we understand politics, and your listeners have to fire up as well. Your listeners must fire up. Talk to your kids, talk to your grandkids. Explain it to them. Because a lot of people sometimes sleepwalk into the ballot box, and then we find out too later. And you'll see it even, Rita, in their advertising. They talk about, yes, they've obviously borrowed it from the same-sex marriage campaign. Yes, with a sort of a colourful parade around it. This is not just about the word yes. This is about the most fundamental change into our constitution in our lives. It's not just about yes. They don't mention the voice, though, do they? Because they don't actually mention the actual part of this operation of how this change will work.
Barnaby Joyce, you said it well there, and I think that advice should also extend to letting others know how you feel. So if your company, if your sporting club, if a business that you shop at regularly comes out and takes a political position you don't agree with, let them know. I'm not saying boycott them, I'm not saying go out there and disrupt their business, but just let them know you are a customer, you are a stakeholder, and you're not happy with their political activism, because you can be sure the left does that every single time. Always a pleasure speaking to Barnaby Joyce.